Alright, so welcome back to another Everdell video on cards, strategies, and synergies, and all that sort. For this video, we're going to be talking about the cards that are going to help you get lots of extra victory points. Now, there's lots of cards that get you lots of extra victory points, and that's what we're mostly going to be talking about. But before we talk about the cards that give you extra victory points, I thought I'd mention the rest of the cards here that we still haven't talked about, really. Now, this is an engine building game, of course, and there's going to be a lot of cards that you want to put in your town simply for the resources that are going to get you lots of resources, you know, like if you have a farm in your town, you could get 2 twigs for every farm in your city with the barge toad. The shopkeeper gives you a berry every time you play a critter. The peddler allows you to basically exchange 2 resources of your choice for 2 resources of your choice, okay? Resin Refinery is going to give you a resin every time it's activated. The farm's going to give you a berry every time it's activated. The Storehouse is like a red destination card because when you come here, you get all the resources that you stored away in your storehouse. If you play this in the early in the game, as in like winter, you're going to get to activate this 3 times, and you could potentially have a lot of resources on the Storehouse. And then later on in autumn, you're basically preparing for autumn, for a very powerful season in autumn. That's basically what you're doing with the Storehouse. But yes, that's a good engine building card there. If you're patient and you're interested in long-term effects. The general store, it's going to get you a berry, but if you have a farm, you get another berry every time it's activated, so potentially 2 berries. The twig barge is going to get you 2 twigs every time it's activated. The mine's going to get you a pebble every time it's activated. Every time you play a construction, you're going to gain one of those 3 resources of your choice, just not berries, or pebble, or if you're playing with pearl buck, obviously not pearls. If you already have a wife in your town and the husband is sharing space with the wife, you get a resource of your choice when this is activated, but it's still contingent on the wife being around and a farm being around to boot to get the resources. The carnival, it could potentially get you a lot of cards, and it could potentially get you some resources of your choice. So that's the carnival. If you have a couple of pearls in your town and you're playing with pearl brick, the harbor could get you a couple of resources every time it's activated. Also, it's worth 3 points. That's a good card. The pirate, it is a gamble, but it is a strong gamble, and it's worth trying because if you manage to succeed, you get a free pearl. You get a pearl, basically, for playing in your town. So that's, the pirate, The chip sweep and the miner mall, these let you activate a card in your city or a card in an opponent's city that are green production cards. If you have some green production cards in your city, or some good ones, this will help you get a lot of resources or cards, depending on what you got. The miner mole, if your opponents have a lot of green production cards, and you don't especially, this could potentially still help you get a lot of either resources or cards. And so those are the main cards that are going to help you build your engine for your town. Now, there are a couple other cards here that don't really go well with any of the videos either. So the Fool is only going to basically disrupt your opponents. It's going to take up space in your opponent's town. It's going to decrease their score by 2 at the end of the game. But if they have a dungeon or a university, they can get rid of this. Still, that's contingent on them having one of those 2 cards. Or, they might get this into their town, but if their dungeon is already full, well, oh well. That stinks, right? Especially since that's what a skunk smells like. It smells like. It's stinky. So, stinky all around. But it doesn't really go well with any of the other videos and strategies. The fairy here is only really good if you're obviously playing Pearlbrook, obviously, but it's only really good for allowing you to place your frog worker here to activate any river destination. If a river destination you want to go to is blocked by another frog, if you have this in your town, you could put the frog here instead and activate one of them instead. But it is an open sign. It does have an open sign on it, so your opponents can come here too, obviously destroying your strategy. The Lookout is similar to that, but you can activate any basic or forest location. If you're playing with a lot of players and there's a forest location you want to go to especially, but your opponents have blocked it up, well, this will help you allow you to go there, even though you can't go there you can go here instead and activate that forest location that you've been wanting to activate. So the Lookout is still a really good card to go for, but it doesn't really go with any of the other videos, really. So that's why it's just slightly mentioned in this last video. But when it comes to victory points, the Purple Prosperity cards are some of the best cards you can get. The Evertree, it's worth 5 points at the end of the game. But then if you have another Purple Prosperity in your city, that's an additional point. Well, how many Purple Prosperities are there in the game? If you're playing with extra cards and the Probrook cards, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. You're not going to have all of these in your town, but there's 9 possibilities that you could have in your town, so you might get a few extra points with the Evertree. But like I said, it's not likely, because these are expensive, especially most of these, especially like the Palace and the Castle and the King and the Queen. They're extremely expensive. And obviously the Evertree is extremely expensive too. So the chances of you having a bunch of Purple Prosperity cards is not likely. You might have, including this one, you might have 2 others, maybe 3 others at most. Still, it's going to get you some extra points. The School, it's worth 2 points, but then for every common critter in your city, which is most of those green production cards, a lot of them are common, but there's also a lot of Tan Travelers that are common, like that Wanderer and the Postal Pigeon, for instance. Those are all common critters you could potentially have in your city, so you could get a lot of points with this. I think I've gotten maybe, not including the 2 that it's worth, I think I've gotten like 5 or 6 on occasion with the School, so that's a good one. The Theater, it's worth 3 points, but you're going to get an additional point for each unique critter in your city. Well, what's a unique critter? Well, the Historian's unique, the Bard is unique, and you do get to play the Bard for free if you have a theater in your town, so the 2 of them combined is a very strong strategy for sure if you want a lot of victory points. Heck, if you notice, the Bard is in the background on the card. So the Theater is a good one, worth a lot of victory points, especially if you've been getting a lot of unique critters. The Judge is a unique critter, for instance. So there's a few. The Doctor, I believe, is a unique critter as well. So there's a lot of unique critters, and obviously the Ranger is a unique critter. So there's a lot of unique critters you could potentially have in your town with the Theater. The Castle is worth 4 points, but it could give you 1 point extra for every common construction in your city. So like I said, if you've been going the green production route and you've got a lot of green production cards, you've probably got a lot of common construction cards in your city, so you could potentially have a lot of extra points with the Castle. The Palace is with unique construction, so you might have some unique construction cards in your town, like maybe the Courthouse, that's unique construction. The Dungeon and the University, those are unique constructions. The Lookout is also a unique construction, so there's a lot of unique constructions that you could potentially have in your town, and obviously a lot more than that, obviously, like the Fairgrounds, for instance, and many more. And so you could potentially get a lot of extra points with the Palace. The King is going to give you 4 points at the end of the game, but if you've been doing a lot of the events or a lot of the special events, if you've even achieved one of those, you could potentially get a lot of extra points with the King as well. So this is a good one. The Wife is going to get you 3 extra points if she's also paired with a husband, and even if you don't get the husband, she's still worth 2 points. But like I said, if you don't get the husband, it's almost pointless having the wife in your town. The Architect is worth 2 points, but potentially to a maximum of 6 more points, so potentially 8 points, if you have a lot of resources you weren't able to utilize at the end of the game that are resin and pebble. So the Architect is another good card, and if you get that crane in the beginning of the game and you have this as well, you get to play this for free. Otherwise, it's going to cost you 4 berries. The Shipwright, if you're playing with Pearlbrook, it's going to give you 1 extra point for every card in your city that is from Pearlbrook. Okay, so what do I mean by that? And it doesn't include endorments. Okay, well, the Messenger is from Pearlbrook, so that's included. Let's see, what else do we got here? Maybe that's it for... the Fairy Ferret is another card that's from Pearlbrook, so that could get you an extra point as well if you have it. Same thing with the Pirate Ship, if that's in your town. Let's see here, what else? The Fairy could potentially be in your town, so that's another card that would work with the Shipwright that's going to get you that extra point. The Pirate is another one from Pearlbrook. Same with the Harbor. So there's a lot of cards you could potentially get with the Shipwright. But remember, there's only like four constructions and 4 critters. So the most you could ever get is 8 points added on to the 2. So that's still a lot of points when you think about it. But you're probably not going to get 8. Maybe 2 or 3 plus the 2. Still, that's a potentially good card for getting extra victory points. The Scribble Champion is really cool because, and I actually lost to my opponent. I played this just yesterday. I lost to my opponent because he decided to try out the Scribble Champion strategy, and he had all 3 Scribble Champions, by the way, because this is going to get you 2 extra points for each Scribble Champion in your city, okay? And it shares space with multiple Scribble Champions. So you're not wasting space by having 3 Scribble Champions in your city. And so now you got 2, 4, 6 points plus the 2. So if you have 3 Scribble Champions, that's 8 points. He got 8 points, and it only took up 1 slot in his town. And it's cheap. It only costs 2 berries. Unfortunately, he did not get a Scribble Stadium, so he had to pay for all 3 cards. Regardless of the case, he still would have only played maybe 1 Scribble Champion in his town anyways, but still, he had to pay for all 3 cards. But it was still worth it. He still beat me by 12 points at the end of the game. But this gave him 8 of the 12 that he definitely beat me with. He also had a lot of Purple Prosperity cards. He had more Purple Prosperity cards than I did. He scored a whole lot more points. I only scored like 6 points with my Purple Prosperity cards, but he scored like over 20 points with his Purple Prosperity cards. So while the engine building is an engine building game and you're going for green production cards, you don't want too many of them, because you want to save space for some of these Purple Prosperity cards. And that's the whole point of getting the resources with those grain production cards, so that way you can afford to have a few of these in your town, because they are expensive. Most of these here are very expensive. So that's the strategy of doing that. And that's why I talked about the grain production cards first for this video, because that's the whole point of playing them. To make it so you can get a few of these in your town. If you don't go the green production route, if you don't have a lot of green production cards, especially the ones that give you resources, or the blue governance cards that give you resources, etc., then maybe you'll get 3 of these Purple Prosperity cards into your town. 2 or 3, maybe, especially if it's the Evertree. But you could potentially have 5 or 6 or more if you have like 4 or 5 grain production cards in your city. It's potentially a possibility. So like I said, if you want to have an easier time playing these cards that give you lots of victory points based on certain occurrences, then you need to obviously get some grain production cards too. Okay, but that's not the only cards that give you victory points. There's a lot of other cards here that will give you victory points too. Some of them I've mentioned in other videos because of the synergies they have with other cards. Now, we've already talked about the messenger, but every time you play a messenger, you do get a point token, and it doesn't take up space in your town, so it's a minor thing. The juggler here, if you have 3 twigs, you can pay 3 twigs to gain 4 points. That's still a lot of points. But, however, if you have more than 3 twigs, or you don't have 3 twigs, or whatever, you can instead, or it doesn't matter regardless, you can instead pay 1 twig to reveal 1 card from the deck, and you can do this as many times as you like, and if the total base value of revealed cards is 6 or more points, you get 6 point tokens. So you can get 2 more point tokens, basically, if you take the gamble, and you have twigs to pay with, 3, 4, 5, whatever. You could potentially get a lot of points that way, 6, and you discard all the cards that are revealed, too. Well, obviously, we talked about the Bard earlier, but if you discard 5 cards with the Bard, you get 5 point tokens. That's a lot of point tokens. The Monk, every time you pay 2 berries to an opponent, you get 2 points each. Well, that's cool. You get 2 point tokens every time you do it. If you play this, and it's easy to play in the beginning of the season, and you have a ton of berries, and you get to activate this 2 times maybe, you could potentially get 4 points with the Monk by paying 4 berries. So that's one way of utilizing your berries. If you're not utilizing them for other stuff, you can utilize them for point tokens. Because the Monk on its own, it's not worth anything. So if you're going to put this in your town, you better make sure you have some berries you can pay to another opponent to get some point tokens. Now, the university is a minor thing, but it could potentially give you some extra points as well. When you put a worker here and discard something from your town, you could get some point tokens that way for every time you do it. So if you do this a couple of times, you can get a couple extra points that way. And it is worth 3 points. Well, I talked about the chapel earlier. It's worth 2 points. If you did this like 3 times during the course of the game, you could potentially get 3 points, up to 3 points with the chapel. It's not likely you'll get to do this in winter time. You might be able to play it in winter, but you won't likely get to put a worker there in winter. So that most likely, unless you get the ranger, and the ranger allows you to move a worker, and you decide to move the worker off the chapel to another location, that you could potentially get to activate this more than 3 times. Potentially. But most likely 3 at most. That's 3 extra points. That's 5 points. Okay? But there's another reason why the chapel is a good card to go for. If you can get the shepherd, okay? So if you can get the shepherd, if you already have the chapel in your town, you've already activated it 2 or 3 times, it's totally worth playing the shepherd, because not only do you get to play the shepherd for free, because if you don't have the chapel, you have to pay 3 berries to your opponent to get 3 berries, which doesn't seem worth it. And if you don't have the chapel, the only thing you're getting is 1 point. So going for the shepherd is pointless unless you have a chapel and unless you have utilized your chapel. But if you have utilized your chapel at least twice, it's worth playing the shepherd, because like I said, you get 3 berries, you don't pay anything because you have the chapel, so you get to play for free, and you also get a couple extra points. That's awesome. Potentially making the shepherd 3 points and 3 berries for having the chapel. That's why I like the chapel so much. If I can get both of these cards, man, awesome. I can get some extra points. I can get a lot of berries. And, if I can get the doctor or the monk, when I'm talking about the doctor momentarily, if I can either get the doctor or the monk, I can utilize those berries for extra points, even more points. Okay, so then there's the town crier. You can give 2 cards to an opponent, and if you do, you get 3 points. It's worth 2 points. If you get to activate this twice, well, that's 8 points with the town crier. Whew, that's a good one. This is a gamble, but anybody can come here because it's got an open sign on it. If you place a worker here, or your opponent places a worker here, you can name a non-green color card. So it can't be the farm because that's green, and there's a lot of them, so you can't name the farm. But if you name something else that's pretty common, you don't want to name something most likely unique, but if you want to name something common, like, I don't know, you have to keep an eye on what has been drawn and what are the chances of something showing up that hasn't shown up yet. So maybe no postal pigeons have shown up yet, or maybe a mine hasn't shown up yet, or something like that. And you can name something, well, I can't name a mine because that's a green production card, right? But postal pigeon, the wanderer, for instance, something like that. And like I say, you name one of those cards, and you reveal 4 cards. You draw 4 cards, and then if any of the drawn cards match, that you get 3 points. So that's cool. And I forgot to mention, you get to draw 4 cards. So this is another card that lets you draw cards that I forgot to mention that could potentially get you a lot of cards, but it's an open sign, so anybody can go here too. But you could get to potentially draw a lot of cards and potentially get some extra victory points too, potentially getting 5. If you go here twice, potentially getting more than that, right? 3, and 5, whew, that's 8 points. So that's another good card that's going to let you not only draw cards, but get you extra victory points that I forgot to mention in the drawing cards video. The Gazette here is worth 3 points at the end of the game, but you want to get this early on, because when you achieve an event, you get to place a point token here in the Gazette. And if there are at least 3 point tokens here at the end of the game, you gain 3 more point tokens. That's 9 points. That's powerful. But that is contingent on you achieving 3 events. That includes special events, okay? 3 events. So 3 events. If you can do 3 of them, you get 9 points. If you don't, you still could potentially get 1 or 2 more points, making this 5 points. So it's still a good card to try to go for, something you might want to try to get in the beginning of the game. But that could potentially give you a lot of points. The Monastery, you place a worker here, he stays here permanently, but you give 2 resources to an opponent to gain 4 point tokens, making this worth basically 5 points for you. And if you get the monk into your town, you can do this twice in autumn, because, like I said, your worker stays here permanently. So if you have a lot of extra resources and you don't think you're going to utilize them to play another card, or you just don't have any cards to play, the Monastery is a very good card to have to utilize those resources for point tokens. Because at the end of the game, with the exception of pearls, none of the other resources give you points. So it's totally worth doing if you can't play any more cards, especially if your town is full. This is a good card to have in your town to get you some extra victory points. And if you do this twice, that's 9 points potentially with the Monastery. Powerful card that many players who are new to Everdell overlook. Okay, then the Doctor. It's worth 4 points at the end of the game. If you manage to play this for free because of the university, that's awesome. If not, it might not be worth doing because it costs you 4 berries, unless you have the innkeeper. The innkeeper could be very helpful here, or the inn for that matter, if the Doctor's in the meadow. But every time you activate this, you can pay up to 3 berries to get 1 point each. You may not always have 3 berries, but maybe you have 2 berries or 1 berry. It's still worth getting an extra point. And if you do this earlier in the game, you could potentially activate this 2 times, and then you could potentially be getting, 6 plus 4 is 10. So that's 10 points you could potentially get. The Ferret Fairy is good if you have a couple of pearls. This is Pearl Brick, by the way. So if you have a couple of pearls, when you play this, when you activate this, so when you play it, or when it gets activated in autumn, for instance, you could potentially gain 2 points every time if you have 2 pearls at least. That's potentially 5 victory points with this one card. That's not very expensive. Okay, so let's talk about this one first, and then we'll do that one last. The Wood Carver. It's pretty cheap to play, but if you have a Storehouse, you can play it for free. But this is going to utilize your twigs. Twigs are very easy to obtain in this game, so sometimes you have a lot of extra twigs. Well, if you have this and you activate this, you can pay 3 twigs for 3 points, making this basically potentially 5 points for you. And if you activate this twice in the game, that's 8 points. That's powerful. So that's another good card, cheap, that's going to get you a lot of victory points. So another good card you may not want to overlook. And then the Pirate Ship. Now, this isn't a card that could potentially wreck your opponent's strategy, but it doesn't cost anything to play into your town, so you're not wasting any resources playing it, which is nice. But then when you place your worker here, you can move this pirate ship to an empty space in an opponent's city. Then you gain 1 resource of your choice and 1 point token per pearl that opponent has, up to a maximum of 6. To a maximum of 3. So if they have 3 pearls, you get 3 points and 3 resources. And you've basically given them a card that's going to fill up and take up space in their town. Now, if there isn't a worker here, let's say you play this in summertime, and you've given this already to an opponent. Now you're preparing for autumn. Well, you have to take this worker off of here. Now this is in their town, and there isn't a worker here anymore. That means they can put their worker here, given to an opponent, to basically maybe even give it back to you, because you have a lot of pearls, and so now they're going to take advantage and get lots of resources and point tokens. And then, if that's the case, at that point, that worker will stay there probably, and then you won't be able to get it out of your town unless you can discard it with university. Still, that is a possibility that could happen. So it's advantageous for you to play this like in autumn, or play this and then activate this in autumn. So that way your worker stays here permanently, or should I say stays here for the rest of the season as an autumn, and then your opponent can't get rid of it. Your opponent cannot get rid of this card because your worker is going to stay there. So that is a strategy that you could pull off with the pirate ship. And it's only worth utilizing if you have an opponent that actually even has pearls to begin with. But it might still be worth it even if they only have 1 pearl. But usually 2 is a good deal. 2 is a very good deal. So that's something to consider. So that's basically all the cards that I want to talk about that are good strategies that are going to give you lots of victory points. And that pretty much means that you don't want to obviously overlook any of these cards, because all of the cards in Everdell are very useful and have their usefulness for sure. So maybe this will help some of you guys. If you guys liked this video or any of the others, don't forget to leave me a like, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye.